Hi. Before this video begins, I just want to say, don't use this Freddy build. I promise it's not really strong. Especially don't use it if I'm in your lobby as Survivor. You will lose, I promise. Well, with that out of the way, let's get into the video. In DBD's history, we've had so many metas that I've almost lost count of them. I've personally been around since original Hex Ruin with its ridiculous red skill checks. And now that we've been stuck in the Pain Resonance meta for the past, 3 years? I'm curious, do you guys remember Pop meta? Before I even get into this, I know what you're going to say in the comments. But Kassir, Pop is still one of the most used killer perks, and Darva put it in the top tier for the best killer perks in the game. Listen, I'm not saying Pop is unusable, but I mean like real Pop meta. Like Pop is the best perk in the game meta. Well, it's popped up, pun intended, a few times. There was a pretty short amount of time where you could use original rune with Pop Goes the Weasel, and this is one of the most broken metas we've seen. And keep that in mind, because that's going to be something I say a lot in this video until I get to my main point. There was also the most recent Pop and Pain Res meta, which made doing generators extremely difficult for solo teams. But in typical behavior fashion, both these perks caught a nerf in the same patch, bringing down the viability of both perks. We also had the Corrupt Intervention in Pop meta, which lasted a long time. Both these perks were hit with a rework in the 6.1.0 massive perk overhaul patch. With all that being said, I want to talk today about, I'm sure you guessed it, Pop Goes the Weasel. I'm going to briefly cover the history of the perk before approaching the main topic of the video. So let's begin with the history. On release, the perk would power up your next kick to hit for 25% of the generator's total progress. However, the perk was only active for 30 seconds at tier 3. For those who need a bit of a visual, the cooldown for Eruption is currently 30 seconds. I'm sure that if you were playing in the time of the 3-gen meta though, you remember that very well. For a long time, the perk was good, but a bit tedious to activate due to the short amount of time you have the perk activated. Well, in patch 3.0.0, Pop became the meta perk that it was for a long time. All 3 tiers became unified with how much percent of a generator was removed. The only difference being the timer giving you a full minute at tier 3. In patch 4.3.0 though, Pop was revisited once again. It was nerfed from 60 seconds at tier 3 to 45. Following this change, Pop was left alone until patch 6.1.0, where Pop was unofficially reworked. The way the regression worked was changed from being a flat 25% of the generator's progress to now being 20% of the generator's current progress. This may not sound like a big change, but trust me when I say that took Pop from being the king of slowdown to being outmatched in nearly every way. As I said earlier, this was the patch where Corrupt Intervention was also changed, as well as Eruption and Overcharge were made much stronger. The infamous patch 6.1.0. If you guys weren't around and you'd be more interested in learning about that patch, let me know in the comments below. I'd be pretty interested in covering it. But for now, let's get back to Pop. In patch 7.0.0, Pop was buffed to 30%, putting it back at the top of the meta, but this was quickly reverted in patch 8.0.0. So if you're keeping track, that is 5 changes since Pop released in 2018. And honestly, I don't think it really needed any of them except its initial buff. Once back at 20% of the current progress, in my opinion, Pop has gone from being the best perk in the game to now being more of a supporting perk, which I think is a bit sad. What I'm showing on screen right now is the reasoning for Behavior's decision to nerf Pop Goes the Weasel when it was at 30%. I just want to take a minute or so to talk about this reasoning they gave and tell you why I don't think that's a very good reason to nerf a meta perk. So when Behavior nerfs a meta, usually they have a pretty good reason. For example, the original Hex Rune with its red skill checks. Basically, the red skill checks were very strong against new players. Let's look at Deadman Switch and Pain Resonance originally. You could get up to 12 activations of the perk. And in solo queue, people aren't going to get off the generator because they don't care, they're listening to Doja Cat, they're not paying attention. It is what it is. The reason they gave for nerfing Pop boils down to, in my opinion, you could read into it differently, if the killer spreads hooks out, the perk is too strong. And while I think that's really interesting because isn't a killer spreading hooks out a really healthy way to play? Like, shouldn't killers be incentivized to do this? I mean, I guess this goes back to the whole hooks versus kills thing, and I don't really want to get into that again, but I personally think that while playing for kills is stronger, I would say it's a more enjoyable experience for most people to play for hooks. The only issue is that playing for hooks isn't really viable against solid teams, and most people want to win. I do think that if there was more perks that incentivized you for spreading hooks, and they were more viable, and the act of actually leaving the hook and not just trading at the hook was rewarded as well, that the game would be in a really healthy state. Again, this is just my opinion. You're allowed to disagree, but it's my video, so I'm going to say it. Also, I do want to say that I recognize that the strongest killer perk in the game, Scourge Hook Pain Resonance, does reward you for spreading hooks, but that's just one of the many perks in the game. Anyways, before we go off on a long tangent, just walk with me here. Pop Goes the Weasel requires the killer to chase, hit again, hook, leave the hook, and finally kick the generator. That's a lot of time investment in Dead by Daylight. The effect should be strong. If the perk is being activated many times, that means the killer is not proxying, because they need to leave the hook in order to kick that generator. Unlike the other huge meta perk, like Pain Resonance, technically there's an argument to be made that Pop was oppressive when forcing trades. However, again, this is the exact same argument for perks like Pain Resonance, and Pain Res is one of the best designed meta perks we've seen. However, in my opinion, not as healthy as Pop. So what was it that made Pop such a healthy perk then? Well, let's take a look at two other perks that I think are very healthy, No Way Out and Grim Embrace. These perks incentivize the killer to spread out the hooks with a token system to get an extreme amount of value. Grim Embrace blocks generators, No Way Out blocks the exit gates. While Pop Goes the Weasel doesn't have a token system, just try and think of it as having 12 tokens that you can use throughout the match due to survivors having 12 hooks as a team. While you could sit at the hook and force trades, you're not going to get that much value from your perk, because if you leave and kick a generator and then just go back to the hook, that 25% is going to be made up while you're sitting there camping the person until they are sacrificed. Yes, you can tunnel with the perk, but if that determines if a perk is well designed or not, then quite frankly, there's not very many well-made perks in the game. It'd be a bit unfair for me to pretend like the perk isn't used best by high mobility killers, but literally every perk in the game is. The only meta we've had that low mobility killers were able to keep up with is the 3-gen meta, and nobody wants that back. So labeling the perk as unhealthy because it was good on high tier killers isn't a great stance. So, I was curious, from the day the perk was released, just who was complaining about Pop Goes the Weasel? I dove into the Dead by Daylight forums, and I couldn't find any complaints about the perk past people just not enjoying generator regression. So, my big brain take, ultimately, is something you know if you followed me on Twitter, @Kassir. I tweet a lot, link in the description. I really do think that people's problems with Pop Goes the Weasel was always the other perk in the meta. Paid Resonance taking 25% off your generator, paired with 30% of the remaining progress, was a lot. Original Hex Ruin making doing generators exceptionally difficult, only for Pop to take off 25%. Corrupt blocking generators for 3 full minutes while the killer is hitting Pop on the generators that you're allowed to do. All these perks that paired well with Pop have been nerfed since then. And with the rampant brand new part usage, I personally think there needs to be another generator perk that can keep up with the speed that generators can go right now if a team comes in with the intention of doing them fast. And despite all of this that I've just said, I don't even think Pop is a bad perk. I just don't really think there's any other perks other than Pain Resonance that can keep up with a team that is bringing their A game. Eruption is good, for sure, but 10% is made up so quickly. And unless you're bringing chase perks, which against teams that are just doing generators very fast isn't gonna do much, well then you're just left with Pain Resonance, DMS, and Grim Embrace. And only one of those does actual damage to the generator. You could also run Hex Ruin, but that's a totem, and we know how that goes. Pop has gone from being a number 1 to being a sidekick perk at best, and I just find that extremely sad. I really do hope that relatively soon the perk returns to its former glory. We've been dealing with Pain Res for 3 years. I think we should get Pop back up to that number 1 spot out of this weird sidekick role that it's in right now. It doesn't really even fit the perk, but oh well. If you enjoyed the video, please do consider liking. If you disagree with me, that's fine. I mean, I know this probably isn't a very popular opinion, but it's just how I feel. But if you're interested in more discussion content like this, please do consider subscribing. I have a lot of videos at this point, I think 50-some, that you can watch. We are less than 100 subscribers from 1,000. If you want to share your opinions on Pop, please feel free to do so. Just don't be a dick about it. My Discord channel and community... Oh my gosh. My community Discord channel and my Twitch are linked in the description, as well as my Twitter. I usually don't link that, but I mentioned in the video, so I guess I will. Alright, everyone. Thank you for watching. Please have a good day. Bye-bye.